Okay, so you want to own a funeral home. Put your name on the sign, keep the chapel full, and collect steady checks from a business that can never run out of demand. The building sits on a familiar road. The vehicles are polished. Families have been walking through the same front doors for decades. The old owner knows half the town knows the name above the entrance, and the phone rings whether the economy is booming or falling apart. It looks almost unfairly dependable. Then the phone rings at 2 in the morning. Someone has died at home. A vehicle has to leave. A licensed person has to answer. The building has to be ready before the family has chosen a ceremony, a casket, a cremation, or even whether this is the funeral home they will ultimately use. You bought a business built around an event that is certain. You did not buy the family's decision. That gap is where the economics live. Because before this place earns $1 for you, you have to survive buying it. Understand the promises already sitting in its filing cabinets. Keep it ready every hour of the year, and figure out why 2 funeral homes can serve the same number of families, while one produces hundreds of thousands of dollars more revenue than the other. And somewhere inside all of that is the answer to the most important question. What are you really buying? Start with the walkthrough. The seller shows you the chapel, the arrangement rooms, the offices, the preparation area, the garage, the vehicles, the furniture, the merchandise displays, and the records. The old family name is still fixed above the entrance in metal letters. Everything feels like one complete property. It may not be. You might be buying the operating company but leasing the building from the seller. You might be buying the land in a separate transaction. You may receive the vehicles, equipment, customer records, and the right to keep using the local name. You may keep the staff. You may also inherit contracts arranged years earlier, along with the responsibility to fulfill them, and depending on the state, buying the business does not automatically give you every license, approval, or permit the previous owner had. The keys are not the whole business, neither is the deed. The seller may talk about the business as though the building itself creates the income, but the building cannot answer a family, arrange transportation, complete paperwork, or conduct a service. If the licensed staff leaves after closing, you may own every room and still be unable to operate normally. If the real estate is leased, a future rent increase can change the economics without changing a single call. If the records are incomplete, the filing cabinets may contain obligations you cannot price correctly until they are already yours. That is why the purchase agreement matters more than the tour. The tour shows what is present. The agreement tells you what transfers, what remains with the seller, and which old promises become your problem on the day you close. This industry is still far more local than many people realize. The United States has roughly 15,400 funeral homes, and about 3/4 are family-owned or privately owned. Large companies operate hundreds of locations, but when they acquire a home, they often keep the old local name above the door. From the road, almost nothing changes. That should tell you something, but not quite everything yet. First, you need to put a price on the place. A funeral home is not worth more just because the chapel is larger or the roof is newer. Buyers care about what the operation can reasonably earn after normal costs are adjusted. Industry advisors often describe the sale price as a multiple of normalized annual earnings. The idea is simple. Take the earnings the business can reasonably repeat, then multiply that number based on how confident a buyer is in the future. For a mid-sized or larger death care business, one industry advisor describes a possible range of roughly 6 to 10 times those normalized earnings, depending on risk and opportunity. That is not a rule for every sale. It shows why 2 similar buildings can carry completely different prices. Say the home produces $250,000 in normalized annual earnings. At 6 times, the business value would be about $1,500,000. At 10 times, it would be about $2,500,000. $1 million of difference with no extra chapel, no extra vehicle, and no extra square foot of land. What changed was not the building. It was confidence that the calls would continue, the staff would stay, the records were sound, and the future services would still produce enough money to justify the price. That is also why building a new funeral home can be cheaper in concrete and more expensive in every way that matters. You can order the equipment, you can buy the vehicles, you can install the refrigeration. A new building still begins with an empty call history. Now imagine the first quiet Tuesday night after you take ownership. The chapel is dark, no cars sit in the parking lot. From outside, the business looks closed. Inside, refrigeration is drawing power, the transfer vehicle is insured and fueled, the phones are covered. The preparation room needs supplies. The building still needs heating, cooling, cleaning, maintenance, and security. Someone qualified has to be available when the next call arrives. Funeral homes spend money waiting. That last staffing problem is easy to underestimate. Most states require funeral service professionals to be licensed. The exact rules vary, but they commonly involve education, examinations, supervised training, and continuing education. If your only licensed director becomes ill, resigns, or simply wants a weekend away, you cannot always replace that person with an ordinary employee. The operation also works on a clock it does not control. Funeral service workers commonly handle nights, weekends, and irregular hours. Many details may need to be arranged within 1 to 3 days after a death. One quiet week can be followed by several services close together. Suppose 2 calls arrive close together. One family needs a transfer late at night. Another needs an arrangement meeting early the next morning. A ceremony already scheduled for that afternoon still has to begin on time. The building may have been silent the day before, but now the same staff, vehicles, rooms, and paperwork are being pulled in 3 directions at once. That uneven rhythm is why a funeral home cannot be staffed only for the average day. The average day may never actually arrive, so the building is not just a place where customers arrive during business hours. It is a readiness system, and most of that system has to exist before the family selects a single thing. Now picture the arrangement room. A family sits across from the director. On the table is a general price list. This document matters because federal law does not allow the home to hide everything inside one unavoidable package. The home can charge a basic services fee for the director, staff, planning, permits, and overhead. Beyond that, the family may select or decline many goods and services. Transfer of the deceased, preparation, use of the building, staff for a ceremony, transportation, a casket or urn, printed materials, memorial products, and coordination with outside providers. The bill is assembled line by line. For the owner, these are not interchangeable dollars. Professional and facility services use staff time and building capacity. Merchandise brings revenue but also arrives with a purchase cost and inventory risk. Transportation puts miles on vehicles. Outside charges may appear on the same statement, even though the money is headed somewhere else. A large total at the bottom of the page can therefore hide several completely different economic streams. The family sees one bill. The owner sees which parts must pay for tonight's readiness, tomorrow's payroll, and the equipment that will eventually have to be replaced. The federal funeral rule also draws clear boundaries. A provider cannot require a casket for direct cremation. It cannot charge for embalming that was not properly authorized. It cannot pretend the law requires something when it does not, and it cannot penalize a family for buying a casket somewhere else. That does not make the business weak. It makes the mechanism honest. The owner does not receive one guaranteed price every time the phone rings. Revenue depends on what the family lawfully chooses, what the home actually provides, and which charges belong to outside parties, rather than the home itself. This is also the point where the economics become inseparable from the way people are treated. The family may be exhausted, shocked, or trying to coordinate relatives who disagree. The director knows more about the process than the family does. That imbalance can be handled with patience and clarity, or it can be abused. The second path is not only wrong, it is commercially destructive. A family may forget the exact price of one line item. It will not forget feeling pressured during the worst week of its life. In a local business, that memory travels through relatives, churches, neighbors, and future generations. Now follow the money after the family signs. The national median price in 2023 was $8,300 for a funeral with viewing and burial, and $6,280 for a funeral with viewing and cremation. Cemetery expenses were not included in those funeral home medians. Those are substantial bills. They are not piles of owner profit. Merchandise has a wholesale cost. Employees have to be paid. Vehicles require fuel, insurance, service, and eventual replacement. The building consumes utilities and maintenance. Preparation uses labor and supplies. Some charges may pass through to newspapers, clergy, cemeteries, crematories, or other providers. One large public operator reported a comparable funeral gross profit percentage of 20.9% in 2025. That was one company's result, not a national average for independent homes. And gross profit is not owner cash flow. The useful point is the distance between the family's bill and the owner's bank account. A funeral can feel extremely expensive to the customer while leaving a much thinner result for the business than the invoice suggests. At this point, advance contracts look like the answer. Open one of the filing cabinets you inherited. Inside is a pre-need contract signed years ago by someone who wanted to arrange a funeral before death. The service may already be selected. The merchandise may be listed. Depending on the arrangement and the state, the funding may sit in a regulated trust or in a life insurance policy connected to the future service. For the funeral home, this is valuable because the future relationship may already be secured. When the death occurs, the family knows which number to call. But the money is not necessarily sitting in your operating account, and the work is not finished. Years pass, wages rise, merchandise costs change, the employee who signed the agreement retires. Then, one night, the phone rings, and the old file comes out of the cabinet. Your home now has to fulfill a promise made under a different owner, in a different cost environment, possibly at a guaranteed price. Pre-need is a future customer and a future bill at the same time. It can make the business more predictable. It can also restrict money, create paperwork, and commit the operator to future labor and merchandise. A buyer who sees a large pre-need book and thinks it is simply cash waiting to be collected is misunderstanding what was purchased. One major public operator reported $17 billion in unfulfilled funeral and cemetery pre-need contracts at the end of 2025. That enormous figure covered a huge network and included future cemetery business. It was not current profit, it represented future work still owed. Now return to the calendar on the office wall. This is where the business can fool even an experienced owner. Funeral homes often track calls, meaning deaths or families served. If the home handled 100 calls last year and 100 again this year, the owner may feel stable. The staff is busy. Vehicles leave the garage. Services fill the calendar, but calls are not revenue. Put two funeral homes side by side. Each serves 100 families. Each looks equally active from the parking lot. Now use the national median package prices from 2023 only as an illustration. If the first home performs 100 funerals with viewing and burial at $8,300 each, the gross package revenue is $830,000. If the second performs 100 funerals with viewing and cremation at $6,280 each, the gross package revenue is $628,000. The calendars match. The revenue differs by $202,000 before comparing merchandise costs, staffing, discounts, direct cremations, local prices, or any other expense. That is the number the parking lot cannot show you. A full calendar can still hide weakening economics. And the national service mix is moving directly toward that pressure. The cremation rate in the United States was projected to reach 63.4% in 2025, while burial was projected at 31.6%. Over the longer term, the National Funeral Directors Association projects cremation could exceed 82% by 2045. The last figure is a projection, not a guarantee. But cremation is already the majority choice. That does not make a cremation case automatically unprofitable, and it does not remove the need for a funeral home. A direct cremation with no viewing is one kind of service. A cremation followed by a memorial gathering, staff coordination, transportation, a video tribute and urn, and permanent memorial placement is another. The need remains. The package changes. Now look around the home you bought. The large chapel was designed for traditional services. Several viewing rooms sit along the hallway. The garage holds multiple vehicles. The display room was built around merchandise that fewer families may select. None of those assets disappears because the call count stays flat. The roof still covers the same building. Licensed coverage still has to be available. Vehicles continue to age. Debt service still arrives on schedule. At first, the owner tries to absorb the difference. A vehicle replacement is delayed another year. A repair is postponed. When a licensed employee leaves, the owner covers more nights personally because another qualified person is expensive and difficult to find. The home remains open. The calendar still looks respectable. Nothing from the street announces a crisis. But the owner now has less time, less cash, and less room for error. A family waits longer for a call back. A detail is missed. A service feels rushed. One poor experience becomes one damaged recommendation, and that matters because a local funeral home does not own the deaths in its community. It does not own the families. It does not even own the next phone call. What it owns, for as long as it can preserve it, is a place in the community's mind. The old surname on the sign, the pre-need file in the cabinet, the recommendation from a church, a relative, or a neighbor, the memory that the last service was handled carefully. All of those things increase the chance that when a death occurs, this is the number someone calls. That is what the buyer was paying for when two identical buildings carried different prices, not mortality, permission to be chosen. And now the decline can feed itself. Fewer recommendations mean fewer calls. Fewer calls leave the same building and staffing burden spread across less revenue. Less revenue forces more delays and more owner coverage. The financial problem begins attacking the very thing that created the calls in the first place. This is the structural risk of the business. Not that people stop dying. That the system turning local deaths into enough trusted calls, and those calls into enough cash, begins breaking one piece at a time, the same mechanism becomes even more dangerous when an owner adds heavy debt. The Lowen Group is the clearest proof. Lowen began as a family funeral business and expanded by buying independent funeral homes and cemeteries. The logic looked almost perfect. Acquire respected local operators, keep the familiar names, connect them to a larger network, spread costs across an industry with enduring demand. By early 1999, Lowen owned more than 1,100 funeral homes and more than 400 cemeteries in the United States and Canada, along with additional operations in the United Kingdom. Over 5 years, revenue rose from about $303 million to more than $1,100 million. From a distance, the company looked safer every year, but the growth was heavily financed with debt. In 1996 alone, Lowen acquired 159 funeral homes, 136 cemeteries, and 2 insurance companies for $620 million. The following year, it acquired another 138 funeral homes, 171 cemeteries, and an insurance company for $546 million. By the end of 1998, interest-bearing debt exceeded $2,300 million, more than 7 times its level 5 years earlier. Now repeat the owner-level problem across hundreds of locations. One home performs fewer services than expected, another produces less revenue per call, a third takes longer to integrate. Cash flow weakens, but interest does not wait. Management has less freedom to support weak locations or absorb disappointing years. Lowen reported a loss of $599 million for 1998 after reporting $42 million in earnings the year before. It entered bankruptcy proceedings in 1999. The funeral homes did not become unnecessary. The ownership structure became unsustainable. That is the difference between a durable industry and a durable owner. Scale can still help. A larger network may spread administration, purchasing, technology, and staffing support across many locations. A funeral home connected to an owned cemetery may share facilities, personnel, and equipment. An independent home may have less scale but stronger local responsiveness and closer owner relationships. Neither model wins automatically. There is another reason similar homes can produce different outcomes. A standalone funeral home may pay an outside cemetery or crematory whenever a family needs those services. A combination property that owns related operations may be able to share staff, equipment, facilities, and administrative work. One large operator says those combined locations are typically more cost competitive and carry higher gross margins than separate operations. That does not mean every owner should buy more property. It means the same funeral can sit on top of a different cost structure depending on what the owner actually controls. A chain can overpay and borrow too much. An independent owner can become trapped by one oversized building, one retiring licensed director, or one local name that was more attached to the seller than the buyer realized. The strong version of this business begins before the purchase agreement is signed. The price is based on current, normalized earnings rather than an old burial mix. The buyer understands which pre-need promises come with the home. The debt leaves room for slow months, roof repairs, vehicle replacement, and staff changes. The facility fits the services families actually choose, and the home can provide traditional funerals, direct cremations, memorial services, and other lawful options without depending on every family selecting the largest package. The weak version can look more impressive from the road. Its chapel is larger, its fleet is newer, the old name remains above the door. The calendar still shows activity, but the purchase price was based on yesterday's earnings. The seller retired with relationships that did not transfer cleanly. More families choose lower revenue services, and the operation has no room when one licensed employee leaves or one expensive repair arrives. Nothing dramatic has to happen. The home can remain open while flexibility disappears. That is what makes the decline dangerous. Activity continues. Cash weakens. Service becomes harder to deliver well. Reputation follows. So, does owning a funeral home actually work? Yes, under specific conditions. It can be a durable local business when the buyer pays for current cash flow rather than nostalgia, keeps debt manageable, understands the future promises in the files, maintains enough qualified coverage, and adapts the building and service mix to what families actually want now. In the weak version, the owner mistakes permanent human need for guaranteed market share. The calls remain close enough to look safe, but the revenue per call falls, the fixed costs stay, and the pressure eventually reaches the service itself. At the beginning, the funeral home looked like a permanent building attached to permanent demand, but the building is only where the work happens. What you are really buying is the responsibility to remain ready, the obligation to fulfill promises made years earlier, and a local reputation that has to survive every family you serve. The deaths will occur, that part is certain. Whether the phone rings in your building is the business.